Alright, so we're gonna work on the rhythm in lesson 2, and I will explain how American English rhythm works so that we can work on it in the lesson together. So how do you usually pronounce this one, and this one? So would you please pronounce that once on your own? Alright, so let's see how your rhythm will change after this lesson. In order to speak with the rhythm, American rhythm, there is a rule called 2-to-8 ratio. 2-to-8 ratio. This means 2 and 8, those are the lengths. And when you pronounce each sentence, you want to prolong the last syllable in the final word. For in this case, it's you. How are you? How are you? Usually people say, how are you? Right? They don't say, how are you? Or how are you? Right? They don't say that. They say, how are you? Hey, how are you? You is long, right? So the ratio of the length is 2-to-8. How are you? So you is much longer than how and are, right? And then the next one, when you look at this, so you want to make that final syllable in the final word long. Ratio 8. So you want to make this part 8, and then everything else will become 2. So you will pronounce it like this. How are you doing? Ing. Ing. Ing is the final syllable in the final word, and that is pronounced really long at the end. So it sounds like this. How are you doing? Ing. How are you doing? Ing is the long part, right? People don't say, how are you doing? How are you doing? They don't say that. How are you doing? They don't say that. How are you doing? Ing is the long part, right? And then the same thing for the last one. So guess where is going to be pronounced longer? Day. Today, the final syllable in the final word is pronounced much longer than the rest of the sentence. So this part is 8, and everything else will become 2. So how are you doing today? Hey, how are you doing today? Right? They don't say, how are you doing today? Right? People say, how are you doing today? How are you doing today? And let's use our hands to count the rhythm like this. How are you? How are you? You want to get used to the final word being longer. How are you? How are you doing? How are you doing today? And then you realize every single sentence has the same length. You see it? How are you? Same, right? How are you? How are you doing? How are you doing today? It doesn't matter how many words you have in one sentence, but each sentence in one chunk or in one sentence will be pronounced with the same length. How are you? How are you doing? How are you doing today? You finish at the right timing, the same timing, right? How are you? How are you doing? How are you doing today? You don't go, how are you? How are you doing? No, it didn't become longer. This didn't become longer than this. They start and finish at the same timing. How are you? How are you doing? Right? How are you? How are you doing? And how are you doing today? They don't go, how are you doing today? You don't say, how are you doing? It's same. How are you? How are you doing? How are you doing today? Right? So when you get this rhythm, your listening will become better too, because that's how American people speak. Alright, so see you in the lesson and let me know if you have any questions.